In this video, we're building the best starting roster in NFL history. 11 on offense, 11 on defense, plus special teamers. We're choosing guys based on their overall peak, prime, career, and fit on the squad. Now we're jumping right into it with the most important position in all of football, quarterback. So we have only two players who are absolute locks on offense. That's why there's a lockbox in the bottom left corner of the screen. And surprisingly, I think the GOAT, 7-time Super Bowl champion Tom Brady, is not one of them. No! He is going to be our quarterback, probably. Pretty sure he's going to be our quarterback, so don't freak out. No! But the question is whether he should be a lock or not. Clearly, if you look at career, Tom has it by a mile. He's got all of the milestones, 10 Super Bowl appearances, 7 wins, longevity, clearly, and he could play for a few more years, which is incredible. But if we're talking peak and prime plus fit, I actually think it gets pretty close. This is a page I really love. It's from Pro Football Reference, and it's their Hall of Fame monitor. You can actually break it out by position up here, which is incredibly useful. And this Hall of Fame number metric is a composition of a bunch of statistical milestones, Pro Bowls, All Pros, MVPs, titles. So these are all lumped in here. And as you can see, clearly Tom Brady is at the top, but look at these other guys, Peyton Manning and Aaron Rodgers right behind him. Again, they're not even close to him career-wise, but we're talking peak and prime. Peyton is within striking distance of Tom's Hall of Fame number, and he did it in far fewer games, 266 games instead of 332 games for Tom. And also, one of the things to point out about Manning I think is really incredible is his sack number. Just 303 sacks in his career, far fewer than Tom's and Aaron Rodgers. And it gets me thinking too about, well, one, if you're doing best regular season quarterbacks for some reason, it probably is Peyton Manning, actually. I remember watching him growing up, and just the guy was a machine. So mechanical, so methodical, would tear defenses apart. Plus, he had 7 All-Pro selections and 5 MVPs. Now, he did wither in the playoffs. I would say borderline choked, but also he ran into Bill Belichick enough times that the defense created problems for him. But maybe in the future we find out that the postseason stuff has more randomness than we account for. Every regular season game in the NFL is kind of a big deal. And when you consider that the MVP award was across a 16-game season versus a Super Bowl win is over, say, 3 to 4 games, what's more impressive? Being the best quarterback across 16 games or being the best quarterback, let's say, across 3 or 4 games? I still think every playoff game is worth more than every regular season game, of course, but how much more? 2 times more, 3 times more? It's really hard to kind of gauge. But I think clearly Brady, Manning, and Rodgers are in that quarterback Mount Rushmore. And the fourth guy on my quarterback Mount Rushmore, even though he's early in his career, and he's the guy who I think most threatens the lockedness for Tom Brady, is none other than Patrick Mahomes. So here are a few of his accolades. Of course, he's early in his career, but I don't think anyone's gotten off to a better, say, first 75-game start than Patrick Mahomes. And just look at these per game numbers in the regular season at the top here. So Tom and Patrick, they both have pretty similar completion percentages, but Patrick Mahomes is worth an extra half a touchdown per game over Tom Brady. Plus, Mahomes gives you about 40 yards more passing per game, an extra 15 yards rushing per game. And sure, you can say Mahomes has had a stacked offense early in his career versus Tom, his first several seasons, didn't have a lot to work with until he got to 2007 when he had Randy Moss and then Gronk in the 2010s. But also check out their playoff stats. So down here at the bottom, Mahomes has actually quite a bit better completion percentage than Tom, throwing for about 66% over Tom's roughly 63% in the playoffs. 3 percentage points, that's a pretty big deal, actually. Patrick Mahomes gives you 2.5 touchdowns versus Tom's 1.8 touchdowns. He gives you an extra 30 yards passing in the air. And he also gives you another about 26, 27 yards rushing per game. That's a lot of extra yards and touchdowns. Also a half touchdown on the ground for Mahomes. So when you add this all up together, you're getting a full extra touchdown every postseason game out of Patrick Mahomes. Once again, we're going with Tom Brady. He is our guy at quarterback. It's just too much to pass up. This is his quarterback page on PFR. 15-time Pro Bowler, 7-time Super Bowl champion, 3-time MVP. It's an incredible resume. But I think when you consider what we're looking for in a quarterback, they also have to fit the system. And Tom Brady is a little one-dimensional. Patrick Mahomes affords an offense a lot more optionality / versatility, right? He can do rollouts. He can do some RPO. He's got all this extra flexibility, all these extra elements to his game that Tom Brady just doesn't have. So the final reveal, is Tom Brady a lock at quarterback? I'm saying no. I know Tom is super clutch. He's had a great postseason career. He even took team-friendly deals to help out his team. He could also play for a couple more years and add to his resume, maybe add another Super Bowl. I do think in order for Patrick Mahomes to take this role, he needs to win 4 or 5 Super Bowls. And if he maintains his level of production across both passing and he keeps his legs, then I think Mahomes can take the spot here. So in my opinion, Tom's closed the door, but he's left it unlocked. So no lock for Tom Brady. And in my opinion, he plays better with a chip on his shoulder anyways. Now on to wide receiver 1. We're not going to build any suspense for this one because it's really clear. It's Jerry Rice, and he's our first lock on offense. His career accolades are insane. 13-time Pro Bowler, 10-time All-Pro, 3-time Super Bowl champion, just a beast. And if you look at him on the Hall of Fame monitor, he has more than twice the Hall of Fame monitor number than the next guy, Randy Moss, which is just bananas. No one even comes close to Jerry Rice in terms of his career. He's so far ahead of everybody else. He was a complete player, the best route runner ever, great hands. And given our team is going to have 2 or 3 wide receivers, he's an absolute lock. All right, on to wide receiver number 2. This one I think is a lot closer. There's a few guys on this list. Go back to the Hall of Fame monitor page. I think it's between Randy Moss, Marvin Harrison, Terrell Owens, and Calvin Johnson. I think Terrell Owens is a really underrated player, actually, pretty forgotten receiver nowadays. But he was excellent. He had 5 All-Pros, put up great numbers every year. Gonna take him off, though, because he was a huge diva, a team killer at times. And given we have these options, I don't think it's worth taking him. Then we have Calvin Johnson, who arguably has the highest peak and maybe prime of this whole group. He was an absolute monster. And if he only played a little longer, then I think he could have a reasonable shake in this conversation. But I think his career was just too short. One of the things, though, I will say about guys like T.O. and Calvin Johnson that would be awesome to have is just big bodies, big downfield blockers. To have that kind of capability and versatility would be excellent. But if we're being honest, I think it's really just between 2 guys, Randy Moss and Marvin Harrison. Randy Moss had the better peak and prime. Marvin Harrison was just Mr. Consistency with the Colts with Peyton Manning. Harrison with a slight edge too with that Super Bowl. Randy Moss never won one. Let's dive into their side-by-side numbers, though. We can look at the player comparison tool on PFR. And if we look here on a per-game basis at the top, this is for the regular season. Very similar numbers here. Marvin Harrison with a slight edge in terms of receiving yards per game. And we look at the bottom, we can see playoffs per game. Playoff stats per game really heavily weights towards Moss here with 0.7 touchdowns versus Marvin Harrison, just anemic in the playoffs. Part of that was due to, of course, running into the buzzsaw of the Belichick defenses and an often choking Peyton Manning. So the edge here goes to Randy Moss. He was, especially coming out his rookie year, his first few years, just could take the top off of defense, the best deep threat probably ever in NFL history. But there are some, I think, pretty big knocks on Moss. But he's definitely not a lock at receiver here because he had a habit of quitting on teams. Moss was a bit of a head case. He was whiny. He took plays off. What if he's not getting the ball for a quarter or two? Is he just going to stop running his routes? Marvin Harrison was much more consistent. You always knew what you were going to get out of him. And he was an excellent player in his own right. He didn't have the peak of Moss, but his prime was really great as well. So I think Marvin Harrison might have had a better overall career, especially with the extra ring. Moss clearly had a higher peak. Moss at the top of his talents was better than Harrison at the top of his. Primes are comparable, although depends how long you're considering prime for, right? I made that ambiguous for a reason. But for fit here, I think fit is the reason why we're going to go with Randy Moss. He's just unlike any other player as a deep threat. Could do it all. When he was locked in, he was better than anybody else. Maybe even better than Rice. But his off the field stuff, some of the intangible stuff, some of the stuff lacking for Moss in terms of his character, I think knock him a little bit and bring Harrison up. But overall, got to go with Randy Moss. Now, before we get to tight end, let's cover some of the criteria for this team. I've touched it a little bit with this pyramid on the left here. I hope you like that. But we're doing some kind of combination between This player at their absolute peak of their powers, their absolute ceiling of this player's play. The primes, the best several few seasons that we saw with this player. Career, which includes the entire body of work, longevity, postseason play, clutchness, intangibles. We're taking everything into consideration. I think factors like stories you hear about the player, the mythos, the vibe, their persona, extra stuff like two-way capabilities, extra value that they provide, leadership, all that stuff makes a huge difference. So we're trying to get some measured balance between everything here. And then finally, team fit. So where will they fit into our scheme? How do they work with other players? How many options do they give the team? How much versatility does this team have? And if you're enjoying this video, I want to plug, I did a 3-part series, a somewhat similar exercise for the NBA, but looking at only players that never made an All-Star game. How would you make the best 12-man roster? You can find that linked above and below. And by the way, also for both offense and defense, we can really choose any combination of players. This is just the selection I've chosen, but I really consider doing stuff like 2 tight ends, or you could do, if you wanted to choose like a 5 wide receiver set, go crazy. It's really the best combination of players that you can think about for the NFL. And then on the defensive side, you can do 3-4, 4-3, nickel, whatever combination you want to do. This is the one I landed on for a specific reason that I'll go into when we cover the defense. But one of the things I want to really encourage is in the comments below, add your team. I want to see them and we can get some dialogue going. If you disagree with any of my picks, leave a comment below. Happy to converse with you and debate on the internet. And if you're enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. Okay, now we're on to tight ends. This one is a really clear cut. We don't have to talk too much about, I don't know if it's clear cut, but it's really down to just 2 guys. That I think we can all agree on pretty clearly looking at the Hall of Fame monitor. This is, by the way, caveat, I'm using the PFR Hall of Fame monitor, also weighted average value or weighted approximate value. That's not the only thing I'm using to look at these guys. This is just, I think, the easiest, quickest, all-in-one kind of way to get a measure of who's at the top. But I did take other stuff into consideration, other factors. I'm not looking at just like, I'll show you regular season stats, but I'm taking other things in consideration also. So I don't want to overweight this, but I am using this because I think it's the easiest visual kind of guide. And as I'm talking, you can look through the list if you want. You can, go, oh, I didn't realize Gonzalez had 6 All-Pros versus Gronk's 4. But here it's really just between these 2 guys. Gronk's peak and prime clearly exceed Tony's, even though Tony G was incredible. Also, I believe Tony Gonzalez only fumbled twice in his career or something insane like that. Let's go find out. We have the power of the internet here. Fumbles, ads. Fumbles, no, he had 6 fumbles in his career. That's nuts though. How many touches? He had 6 fumbles and 1,300 touches. That is crazy for Tony. I know Gronk's wasn't that good. 5 fumbles and 600 touches. Damn. But career-wise, Tony G has a real argument over Gronk. He lasted so long. Gronk played 143 games, Tony G 270, so almost twice as many games as Gronk, and highly productive. We could take a look at their per game stats on the regular season. Gronk's got a little bit of distance from Gonzalez here at like 9 more yards. Took me too long to do that math. Playoffs per game though, Gronk with a huge edge, 23 more yards than Gonzalez over that time period. 22 more yards, Jesus. So it comes down to what you value really. It's between the peak and prime for Gronk, much higher than Tony G's. Tony's career off the charts, regular season wise. He wasn't on any Super Bowl teams, didn't even start a Super Bowl. But Gronk also came through in the playoffs. He won 4 Super Bowls. Absolutely incredible. I think the biggest difference for me in terms of fit for the team, what they do, Gronk was a much more complete tight end. He was one of the best blocking tight ends in the league at the time, maybe the best blocking tight end in the league. Tony Gonzalez wasn't a fantastic blocker. He came into it later in his career, middle of his career, end of his career, was a better blocker than early on. But it's enough of a conversation that yes, Gronk gets it. Personal preference, I'd rather have Gronk's versatility, the optionality with him to throw big blocks. But credit to Tony G for staying healthy all those years. Gronk, of course, had a tough time staying on the field, but his peak was so amazing. I think this choice is pretty clearly Gronk, but I could totally understand an argument made for Tony G. But I think Gonzalez has made all of his value comes as a receiver. But a lot of other receivers that can do stuff like that. Calvin Johnson frame-wise, of course, he has a different skill set, but Gronk just does so much more and was so critical to those Pats teams. And he's fun. Let's be honest. He's a fun personality to have around. Next to, I think what my favorite debate is, or this is the choice with running back that I think reflects what I'm looking for or my own values in this exercise. Because I think when you talk about all-time running backs or best running backs ever, you're really looking at just three guys. It basically comes down to Walter Payton, Jim Brown, and Barry Sanders. The other backs were fantastic. Emmitt Smith with the Super Bowls, but his line, we all know the story with Emmitt Smith. Other amazing backs, we might see one later in a choice, but you basically have these three big choices: Payton, Brown, Sanders. Jim Brown was clearly the most dominant here. He played in a completely different era back in the late 50s, early 60s, but he was the all-pro running back 8 years in a row, which is insane. I'd say the only big knocks for Jim Brown are that he had Hall of Fame linemen. He also played in the league with between 12 and 22 teams. So I would say it's probably easier to be the best at your position when there's only 12 to 22 teams. He was also playing in a different era. Before, these guys were professionals. So as JJ Redick might say, he was playing against plumbers. Then we have Barry Sanders, who is absolutely incredible. I'd say definitely the best runner of all these backs. We'll take a look at and this is the top two are Walter Payton and Barry Sanders, but to get a sense of their per game, like their rush averages here, the regular season at the top, Barry Sanders with about 100 yards per game, Walter Payton behind with 88, but Walter Payton would provide more value, was that 4 or 5 yards, extra receiving yards than Barry Sanders would give you. And then in the playoffs down here, slightly different story. Barry Sanders not as good, couldn't get quite the rushing yards that Walter Payton amassed, but it's tough because these guys are on different teams, different types of teams. Walter didn't play on like amazing offenses either, but I think it was probably I think Barry played on worse teams than Payton did. That's pretty obvious to say. Yeah, but I don't think the per game numbers, I think they're somewhat close, and I think, peak wise, Barry was probably the best ever. He was so amazing, so electric, could turn any play into a touchdown. I think the big difference too, I didn't show it a screen ago, but their yards per carry, Barry's was 5.0 in the regular season, Walter Payton's was 4.4. So big gap there in terms of yards per attempt. Definitely in favor of Barry Sanders. But the knocks on Barry Sanders, he a bit of a dancer at the line, had the most negative yards of any running back ever. So I feel like he was shooting for a lot of home runs, and maybe you could teach him to do differently because he had such a poor line he had to create for himself. It's a tough one, but I'd prefer a back that kind of just more consistently gets positive yardage and is moving the chains along rather than one that's going solely for touchdowns. Yeah, I believe he lost yardage on 15% of his rush attempts. So that's a lot. And then another big omission is that Barry Sanders wasn't the best goal line back. He was actually taken out by his coach in some short yardage situations. And I don't know, it's tough to say that you're the best running back ever if, we can't put you in on third or fourth and short. I want a guy that can do that, and Walter Payton could definitely do that. The way I'm framing this argument, you can probably tell. In my opinion, Walter Payton is easily the best, most versatile overall back. You get that short yardage that, say, Barry Sanders wouldn't get or couldn't get, wouldn't take big losses like Barry. And then he has other great qualities as well. We're going with Walter Payton. This is going to be, I can make it easier for me to just talk about it without making it seem mysterious or whatever, but we're going with Walter Payton. When I tell you how much I value versatility and optionality, all the things you get out of Payton, I think it's worth it to trade off some of the ceiling stuff with, say, Barry Sanders or even Jim Brown. One of my favorite facts is that the Bears didn't have another Pro Bowl player on offense during Payton's first 10 years in the league. So that's pretty nuts. He didn't play with a stacked offensive line like Jim Brown, like Emmitt Smith. Barry was his entire team's offense. So I'd have to look and see if the Lions, how many Pro Bowlers they had on offense. But just a note, if in the description of this video, I'll include extra notes or extra things I think about that I don't mention here. I've done all this research. I have like vague notes written out, things I wanted to talk about, but sometimes after the fact you realize, oh, I didn't make that argument, or I forgot this angle here. So in the description will be a little bit more detail, asides that I forgot. We might as well call this the Walter Payton story hour, because I have a lot of stuff on Walter Payton that I gotta cover. And I think a lot of things that I didn't know about as like a modern fan, but a few things. I mean, he was always in amazing condition. He's known for doing hills on one specific hill. I believe that's next to a golf course. It's epic watching him run up that hill, for sure, with the NFL Films music. It's awesome. But really, the guy, he played in a different time and age. But the essence of the game he played was with contact. He loved taking big hits and giving big hits to the defense. He had this expression, and his autobiography is called Never Die Easy. If he was going out, he made sure to give you a stiff arm. He didn't go out of bounds. Walter Payton, he preferred to hit you over going out of bounds. And yet he was durable. He had a very long playing career. So the guy was tough, and his body was just as tough. He played with fractured ribs on 4 separate occasions. He had a rash of injuries and stuff like that, but he played, I think he only missed 1 game after he starting, something like that. And then the other stuff that he provides beyond being a fantastic runner, which is actually something we're not even going to talk about too much because that's par for the course. He's in the conversation with all the all-time backs from just a running perspective. If you consider all the other stuff that he gives you, I'd say blocking was another huge aspect to his game that Barry Sanders and Jim Brown didn't have, and actually few guys, almost no guys, just like the top 10 running back list also bring. Yeah, some coaches said he was the best blocker in the NFL. He stoned up Lawrence Taylor on a blitz once in a great move. Yeah, and Payton loved to block. You could have him back there. I think a huge thing is the pass protection element. These other big, great running backs, they could put a body on a defender, but Walter Payton was an excellent blocker. I believe Payton was somewhere around 205 pounds, but he was very powerful for his weight. And I think a part of his game that's forgotten is that he could have been a Pro Bowl receiver. When he retired, he actually had caught more passes than any other running back in history. Payton had great hands and was a good route runner. Also, Payton was the Bears' emergency quarterback, kicker, and punter. He threw 8 career touchdowns and a few picks. He also averaged 31.7 yards on 17 kick returns. Apparently, Payton could throw a football 60 yards, punt it 70 yards, kick a field goal of 45 yards, and walk across the football field on his hands. One of the only knocks against Payton is that he had, I'd say, a weird energy. Most people liked him. He was a good teammate, I think, but he pulled off some sort of annoying pranks, was a little mysterious and distant. Came into training camp on a helicopter once, which I find odd. But he got really tough yards and outdoors. That's a thing to consider, especially when comparing him to like indoors backs like Marshall Faulk or Barry Sanders. Guys playing indoor domes, warm conditions. Payton had to play in Chicago in terrible weather a lot of the time. So some of his yards per carry averages might be lower for that reason. But Payton was also a consummate team player. He let offensive linemen spike the ball after touchdowns sometimes. So I think that's really cool. For everything that Walter Payton brings to the table, his actual running, but his blocking prowess, all the other stuff that he could do. He was just a tough football player. He was great, had an illustrious career. 3rd in all-purpose yards from scrimmage in his career, only Emmitt Smith and Jerry Rice ahead of him. And he also has the Super Bowl on top of it, which is the icing on the cake that some of these guys, LT, didn't ever get. I don't know why I just threw shade at LT there, but sorry. Yeah, Walter Payton, he could run, he could block, he could catch, he could break tackles, he could run into guys, hurt the other team. He did it all great. He was a complete football player. Jim Brown was the most dominant. Barry Sanders was the most elusive, best runner, but Payton was the best overall, so he gets the nod. Now for our last skill position player, this player over here. I've put him out here. They could be anywhere on this field. I just put them so they had space, the slot back. But it could be, like I mentioned earlier, this is, I think, the most interesting decision in the offense. One is because it's the last guy, borderline player, but also what do you want this player to accomplish, right? So this could absolutely be another tight end. I'll work you through my reasoning as to who I think could reasonably take this spot. I think you have Tony Gonzalez, as I mentioned earlier. You could absolutely do a dual tight end deal with Gronk as a matchup disaster. That could totally work. I can see myself doing that. There's Barry Sanders, who wouldn't be out in the slot so much, but him and Walter Payton could switch off. He could be the lead back. Payton could be like fullback / slot back. Pretty interesting. It's a way to get Barry Sanders his like home run ability, and he was just such an incredible player to watch. To get him on the field, that could be a way. Or you could go with one of the top receivers that we talked about. We went Moss, but could throw Harrison in there, could throw Calvin Johnson in there. So there's a lot of options. In my opinion, I think it's down to two guys specifically in Falk and LaDainian Tomlinson. I think to get this offense the most versatility, it makes sense to go with a guy who could both run the ball and be a receiving threat. Walter Payton could be the guy that occasionally spends time in the slot because he could receive the ball. And he could also be the lead blocker for Barry Sanders. I could see that. But what I want is versatility. I want guys that can do both. I think the guys who, and of course, Tony Gonzalez, not a rusher, so we can't put him in different places than use Walter Payton's versatility as well. Slot it in if we go with a big receiving guy. Great option to have. It'd be embarrassment of riches anyway, but we're trying to think about optimality here. So if you're looking at it that way, I really think it's down to two guys, LT and Marshall Faulk. Both guys are actually pretty similar in a bunch of ways. LT is definitely more of the rushing back, Faulk more the receiver. We can look at compare the two players. So LT gets you about 10 extra yards rushing, but Faulk gives you 10 extra yards receiving. So those kind of balance each other out. Where do your priorities lay? And then in playoffs per game, Faulk has a really big advantage over LT. They score about the same amount of touchdowns, but he's got a few more rushing yards, but then way more receiving yards. And this is something we'll come back to. I think LT had some stinkers in the playoffs. I think he occasionally choked. We can just say it. And/or was hurt at the worst times. That happened quite a bit. But yeah, I'll talk through these guys, the arguments for maybe both, or just different thoughts I'm having as I'm going through it. Marshall Faulk was on the better offense, so that both opened things up for him, but also probably stole some of the stats. He was a better receiver, I think more of a home run threat and more versatile. But both had excellent fumble rates, excellently low fumble rates, kind of crazy. In terms of 40 times, this is something I looked up before. Tony Gonzalez ran a 4.5, very fast, in my opinion, for a tight end. LT, a 4.4, 6.40, and Faulk, a 4.35, 40. So it's about a tenth of a second faster than LT. It's a big difference. Yeah, so as you can tell, the way I'm leaning towards here, in terms, especially because Faulk is a more versatile player, some people have called him the greatest chess piece in NFL history. He brings a lot of speed. Marshall Faulk also has the Super Bowl success in the playoff resume. Also known as a very smart player. He'd be standing out in the backfield with Kurt Warner, calling out protections. Faulk had great vision. Faulk could find the first hole at one level, and then the second level still be able to have space and cut and juke away defenders. Faulk was a fantastic route runner, catch better than a lot of wide receivers. But LT was a fantastic player too. They both have MVPs. LT can also throw the ball. I think he threw for 7 touchdowns, something like that. I think these guys are also quite close in terms of peak prime career. I'd probably go, LT's MVP season was absolutely bananas. That was crazy. 28 touchdowns. Yeah, probably LT's peak. Faulk's prime. They both had great primes, but definitely Faulk's career. And I think in terms of fit, it's pretty clear that the things I kind of value is, how many high level things can a player do for you? And, LT, if you wanted more of a primary back, he's more your guy. I think the modern game, especially, just all the things you want to be able to do, optionality in the passing game. So you have Faulk, who's almost as good of a runner. He's got a much higher upside in the passing game, great hands. But yeah, in summary, I think Marshall Faulk, greatest chess piece ever. Also has the Super Bowl over LT. LT had a tendency to choke in the playoffs, so we're going with Marshall Faulk. Although it's clear, wouldn't hate it if you went some other way. But I think the combinations between Payton and Falk are just, it's too good to pass up. I think Walter Payton was pound for pound a better blocker than Tony Gonzalez also. We can move these guys around. You can have Walter Payton back in the pass protection on passing downs. Also have him leak out and catch little sweeps. Marshall Falk can go anywhere and everywhere. He's a fantastic slot receiver. He could be running in motion and so smart. Knew places to go. Fantastic athlete. Didn't choke like LT did. Gronk leading the way as tight end. That's fantastic. Jerry Rice, of course, Randy Moss. Yeah, those are the specialty players. I think it's a great specialty position squad. I do wish in my heart a little bit that I would have the stones to go with Patrick Mahomes here, because I think that does open up stuff in a very different way. But Brady's proven clutchness and excellence over such a long period of time make him obviously the guy. Can't go against that. Now we're on to the offensive line. This is going to be shorter, a little faster, just because most people know the position skill players. I feel like, though, there's a lot of interesting decisions to be made on the offensive line and a lot of rich history in the league to go through and kind of debate on. All right, center. Who is our center going to be? Oh, shit. Didn't have that too close. I better start this from the top. Start it from the top. And now we're on to center. All these guys, these four guys at the top, each make a reasonable case for the position. Mike Webster won 4 titles with the Steelers, played forever, a super long career, so great in longevity. Not going to be in the mix so much for, say, peak, but Jim Otto from the Raiders, a legend, also had a super long career, 10 All-Pros, which it's exceptional. He did play in the 60s, and I do think we have, perhaps I have a bias against guys that played forever ago, a slight one, just because it's hard to tell how they translate. Even though I never specified this would be a modern game, but I always think that if we're talking players 2 generations and one played in a weaker generation, you got to go away from him. And then we have Dermontti Dawson, another Steeler here at the top. He was excellent. Dermontti Dawson, fantastic run blocker too. Dwight Stevenson, who was like a star that shone brightly and quickly. He had the shortest career of everybody, but I think was without question the best, had the best peak and prime. Just had a short career. I think he had a catastrophic injury, a knee injury maybe in his final season that just wiped him out, which was like just a real shame because he had so much of his career left. Also out of left field, there's Chuck Bednarik, who was an All-Pro at center at linebacker. He's further down this list, but he just did a lot of different things, and that's valuable as well. Yeah, and Dwight Stevenson might have been the quickest lineman ever. He was an excellent player, and he was Dan Marino center for the first few years of his career. They overlapped. So it's close. I could see a bunch of different arguments for, Dawson's probably closest, reasonable argument there. The older guys, not so much, but I think for our team, he played long enough, 7 seasons, that it's totally reasonable. I could see, it's close. I could see somebody else taking that spot. Next up, so we're going inside out. We're going to go to the left guard. And it's tough with these. I feel like the linemen are pretty close in general. You just have to weight different things. And we're trying to take a blend of everything and see how they'd fit on the team. But these guards are all very reasonable choices. Absolute legends of the game up here up top. And then you get a quick tail off here. But I think, though, because a lot of their career kind of stats and accomplishments start to lump together, it's hard to make much difference from them if you look at their careers. So I glean towards, it's also just easier for me to research, if I'm being honest, towards peak/primes slightly, and also the fit of the team. So far we have our center Dwight Stevenson. I'm just trying to think about our size here, because a lot of the older guys, even though they're classics, all these older guys are undersized. 6'2", 255. He's going to have to put on, when these guys come into the future, they're going to have to put on a lot of weight. we'll just feed him. So we have to consider size here a little bit in that Dwight Stevenson's kind of under 6'2", 255. What is Dermonti? 6'2", 280. Wow, he's got a lot of weight on him. Yeah, extra 30 pounds. Ooh, Dermonti, you might be making a comeback here because of the weight. But no, I think Dwight Stevenson is just so fucking great. Gotta keep him. We're going off the rails, baby. Okay. Not true. Staying on the rails. Guard. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so in my opinion, it's I think obviously not a lock because it's close here, but Larry Allen's my choice. At left guard, I think one of the big differences with a lot of these guys is the size. And Larry Allen, 6'3", 335. A lot of these guys, especially the older dudes, are just undersized. And he was a freak athlete at that weight. There's a clip of him running down an interception return, I believe. And I'll play it because it's so impressive. A guy his size showing up like that. And his story's great too. He came from rough beginnings. And does this stuff matter? Should it matter? It does to me. It tells you something about a person, I think, that's possibly related, possibly not. But I think he's the guy. I think John Madden said he was like the best player in the NFL or something. I think John Madden said he would draft Larry Allen first in the draft if they had to draft players. So Larry Allen is our left guard. Who's going to be our right guard? On this list, there are so many great guards to choose from. Clearly not a lock case here. These top three, John Hanna, Randall McDaniel, Bruce Matthews, could all make a claim for them. I think especially Bruce Matthews, his longevity and his versatility. He played, I think, every position on the line at various points. He was a Pro Bowler at multiple positions. Bruce Matthews could also be a long snapper, had pretty good size too, almost 300 games. What a legend. But I think we're going with John Hanna because his peak and prime were better than McDaniels and Matthews. So John Hanna is just going to have to put on some weight when he comes to the future and plays on our team. Now for our left tackle, and I promise no surprises on the locks, we have Anthony Munoz. So he is generally regarded as the greatest offensive lineman in NFL history. On many lists, he's number one. So that means he's got to be on this squad. And if you look over at the Hall of Fame monitor, he is at the top of the list. Checks out. He's up there in the mix. But there are, and we have to choose our right tackle. Put these together because there are so many fantastic tackles in history. Forrest Gregg, 6 Super Bowls. Incredible. Jim Parker, Willie Roaf, Joe Thomas, more modern guy, unappreciated on terrible Cleveland teams all those years, but exceptional also. But I think we're going to go with Jonathan Ogden. So we have, I know he's lower on this list than a lot of these other guys. So I have to make the case for why I'm taking a lower guy, a more modern guy. Here's the reason why we're going John Ogden. So let's take out the guys who played in the 60s. Okay. Sorry, mix two. I'm highlighting all the guys that played in the 60s, 50s or 60s. So all these guys, I don't want to say that they're out of the race or out of the running, because there are some exceptional players, Forrest Gregg especially. Go watch some of the clips of him. There's so many great players in this mix, but we have to narrow down the list. So I think anyone that played in the 50s or 60s, just going to knock them down just a little bit. They're still in the conversation. And then you got these other guys who are left. Willie Roaf was fantastic. Ogden's got the Super Bowl, which is really nice for him. If you're a lineman, it's hard to put the Super Bowl on you, but it helps to have it. And I think the other thing that Ogden provides is some size insurance. So he's 6'9", 350 pounds, just a monster of an athlete. We have a lot of older guys on the squad so far. So, it's to catch up folks who jumped ahead. How could you? But we have Anthony Munoz, Larry Allen, Dwight Stevenson, John Hanna. Basically, our left tackle, Dwight, John, you guys all got to put on weight when you come into the future to play on this team, which is fine. They're amazing athletes. I think you should, when comparing guys between eras, there should be a little bit of leeway in terms of a guy was a little undersized back then. If he was amazing at that weight, you could probably put on 20 pounds or whatever to get yourself into the proper weight class. So this last tackle, I think it makes sense to go bigger because him and Larry Allen, perfect sizes, really good. You can't teach size, and to be incredible athletes at that big size is a big deal. So these other guys got to put on a little bit of weight. So I got to go with a guy I think who's bigger, and he's insane. Plus, he's one of the more modern guys, and him and Joe Thomas they played the most recently out of this list. And just Joe Thomas played for a bunch of losers, so it's tough to properly rank him. I think the clincher for me was the snippet I found in a Pro Football Focus article from 2019. And maybe I could show it and read it off to you, but it said, as dominant an offensive lineman as there has ever been or ever will be, Hall of Fame left tackle Jonathan Ogden's 2007 season is the highest graded season we've ever seen from an offensive lineman. So if we're looking at peaks, Jonathan Ogden clearly has the highest peak. If Pro Football Focus is looking at, I'm not sure how far back it goes, but the article's as recent as 2019. So at least in the modern game, he's put up a peak season that is the best they've ever tracked. So John Ogden, you in, right tackle. Shit. I forgot to delete the last lock in the lockbox. Okay, so that's the offense. In the next section, we're going to talk about the defense, but also I want to talk a little bit about the thought process behind this, creating this. The pyramid is not where I started, actually. A few weeks ago, I started to think about what would it be like to create the ultimate NFL starting team, right? And then all these questions came up around, okay, how are you going to measure these guys? Is it like the greatest guys, iconic? Is it the players that would be best if they played today, which are a lot of modern players? Are you measuring? This is the problem with these kind of debates, I think, in sports. Not the problem, but as soon as you ask the question, you start creating frames around how you think it's best to answer that question. Here's the thing with a lot of these debates, right? Talk about historical teams, all-timers, and then the questions start coming out. You're talking amongst your friends, right? Are we talking peak? Are we talking prime? Are we talking career? How do we separate this guy from the team he was on? Was this guy on a great offense and that gave him opportunities, or did that steal some of his stats? And it's really hard to tell with these guys, especially at the top. So I think this kind of exercise, what we're looking at is how do we find a blend between these different elements, which I think I was constructing this pyramid's very basic. I would love to have maybe another layer in here, but I'm not sure where it would fit. So bear with me. But because there is something about the intangibility of these players that I don't think is captured in this kind of metric. I do think fit is reasonable to have at the base because that is what's serving the ultimate service, right? How does this fit in together with the other elements? So I like fit at the base of the pyramid. I do wish there was a layer for intangibles, something around, say, leadership ability, the mythos, the persona, just a thin layer, because I think that matters. Did they cause headaches? How were they in the locker room? Did they give you everything they had? Were they just ultimate competitors? Were they obsessed with watching film and working out and keeping everything in the highest shape and quality? That kind of thing. I think that'd be a good layer to have. And then also I wanted to put here peak, prime, postseason. Some of these guys played on such terrible teams that they never got to the postseason, or they had very limited tries there. So I think that's hard to say. I think clutch would be a good layer. Clutchness, big games. But again, some of these guys playing on huge losers, which happens. It happens a big chunk of the time. What do you do about that? So it's hard to say. Clutchness, I think goes through all of maybe I'll do clutchness as like a snake that goes around, tightens up, right? That's what happens in big moments. People tighten up, they constrict, and the whole thing doesn't flow. But Tom Brady, baby, he does it. And that's why I'm wearing his jersey today. The Tom Brady jersey. Yep, I'm still repping it. Still repping Tom Brady. That's why we're going with Tom, but he's not a lock. Sorry, Tom. Not a lock. I'm really going into extra time. So I think peak, prime, career, and fit to create this kind of team is like a pretty fair way to go about it. And I think looking at the total career, longevity, and when I think of career here, I also think of postseason success. So did they get a ring? That's a reasonable question to ask. It's harder. I think you can Championships are tough because certain sports, one guy can have an outsized impact on a team. In football, it's really spread out. There are so many dynamics, different factors like, coaching is just one, scheme, luck. The playoffs, it's just a couple of games can decide one's fate in terms of one's legacy. One game can end your whole year. I don't want to complicate it too much, but I think this is a good blend. How does this fit in with the scheme, the squad, all the different elements coming together? Even with the line here, I was thinking, shoot, there's two guys, Larry Allen and John Ogden, who are great weights, who could play in the modern game, but the other dudes, they have to put on a few pounds. Like maybe you're arguing from another element where you're saying the guy as they played exactly at the time. Love Gronk as the tight end. I think that's a clear choice. Jerry Rice, obviously a lock. Marshall Faulk, the greatest chess piece in NFL history. And Randy Moss. Actually, Moss might be one of the ones. I might want to go with Marvin Harrison now. And I would Calvin Johnson. Calvin Johnson didn't cause all those headaches, right? But I like Moss there too. Walter Payton, the do-it-all running back, could run it, obviously, could block both in the passing game and the run game, go out for passes, competitive, fierce, tough, would run into, hit defensive players, make them think twice about trying to tackle them. Special teams, I think I could do it all. And I think the line is really solid too. I think we weight heavily towards the peaks and primes of guys, but I think that's necessary because for so many of these positions on the line, the careers really get close when you're looking at it for overall value. It's a hard thing to measure, of course, in the modern day. They're definitely measuring things better and measuring a lot more. So, yeah. You might argue with some of those picks, but I think they're all reasonable. I think the toughest ones are probably Dwight Stevenson and John Hanna. But yeah, for the lines, for the offensive line, I think a lot of the careers start to get jumbled up together. The Pro Bowl stack up, the All Pro stack up. Then you're comparing by era. Because it's so competitive, you start saying, okay, maybe some of these older guys you can drop off the list because who knows how they would hang today. And I think because of that, you overemphasize for the peak and prime. Although there probably are some fit considerations. I still don't know these linemen as well as I would like to in terms of their capabilities. They're all highly capable pass and run blockers, obviously. But there might be some schematic stuff that makes more sense with various guys. And of course, there's always the size concern if they play today. So thank you so much for watching. Part 2 will be the defense, and I really appreciate you watching. Thanks. Please like and subscribe.